Here we are.
Yeah. How's it going, Rob?
Oh, pretty good, thank you. Yes, it's Sunday night for me, and I think Sunday morning for you.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's always a one it kind of sucks as it is right now, but it's gonna be worse when it once again becomes daylight savings time. So yeah.
Ah, yes, that's true. Yes, yes. Also, too, there were some tornadoes or something, but I think they're further north than you, aren't they?
Oh yeah, I don't think it's in Florida. There were some tornadoes. I don't remember what state exactly, but yeah, there were some. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I heard there were a number of fatalities there, unfortunately. When I moved to Canada, I actually not long after I got there, a week or two later, there was actually a tornado warning on the TV, and I actually thought it was a joke at first. And it turns out it's actually true. Some parts of Canada actually are in the tornado zone, although it's pretty rare, I think.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. Tornado warnings, I think those things tend to be, well, I don't know how often Florida gets them. But I think we had some warnings back in Minnesota when I used to live there. So
Yeah, makes sense. I think it's probably along similar lines with Canada. It's probably not very likely, I suppose, but I guess there's a risk.
right.
Would be my
Um,
guess.
a lot of my experiences have more about been about earthquakes because Japan's the earthquake country. So
Absolutely.
mm,
Whereas Australia, in contrast, is a very old continent, and it has, as a result of that, they found bacterium in 4 billion-year-old rocks here because
okay.
there's almost no geologic activity, or 3.8 billion, or something along those lines.
Mhm.
But the flip side of that is the soil is relatively poor because of
Oh,
lack of geologic activity, which enriches the soil.
I see.
Mm.
Right. Now, speaking of earthquakes, I'm trying to figure out if this is something uh, that's completely in my mind or it's an actual kind of a fable for children. Like, if you don't do what your parents tell you, an earthquake will happen. Have you ever heard anything
Oh,
like that?
I haven't heard that one, but then in Australia, that probably wouldn't make much sense. Probably wouldn't have much have wings really, because that you do the wrong thing and there still wouldn't be an earthquake. So
Okay, yeah, because this is the closest thing. I don't even know if it's like a real saying that you say to kids. I just thought it was just something that was in my head when I was a kid.
could it be a
Um,
Japanese saying? I mean, it would probably make more sense then.
that's what I'm wondering. I don't know if it is. I can't
Right,
verify it, but
right.
but the closest thing to a supernatural experience I've had is this happened to me once.
Oh, right. Okay.
Right, yeah. Yeah, there was some computer games, some kids computer games I was playing one time, and I wasn't uh getting ready for the kindergarten bus, right, or something like that. And but I was just glued to the computer, and then an earthquake happened because I wasn't doing what my parents told me.
That's a cool. If true, that would be a form of collective punishment, though, wouldn't it?
Oh
Some kid
yeah.
little kids being disobedient, and the whole suburb has an earthquake. Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah. But I don't know. It was just something that came up in conversation once, and I've been thinking about it since. I don't think it's a real saying that I know of,
Right.
but
Right.
yeah.
Okay. Yes. No, that's fair enough. It
Hmm.
is interesting when you hear things from your childhood. And when I was about 12, I heard a radio report about an uncontacted group of Australian Aborigines who had been found and basically brought into a settlement. And this was the early 80s, and there had been some before I was born, some uncontacted groups, but this one was on the radio. And I asked people around me, I was 12, I asked people around me, nobody seemed to know anything about it. And I didn't. I wondered about that. And I always never forgot it. I always wondered for years and years. This was the pre-internet era, of course.
Yep.
And even as an adult, I did some research early in my early adulthood and couldn't find anything on them. Well, this, of course, is a different era, and I can tell you there's a Wikipedia page on it.
Hmm.
And I've read the page and I've read a number of other articles now. It did indeed happen. It was not my imagination. There was indeed an uncontacted group. So what had happened was in the 1960s, there was quite a large group that was brought in, contacted and brought in, and one small offshoot of that group of about 9 or 10 individuals had been missed. And
Okay.
this group of 60 people had been brought in and they'd been settled in an area. And one of these guys who'd been coming in the 1960s was actually out, this is 20 years later, in a car fixing a fence. and he comes across one of his relatives, one of his long lost relatives.
Oh, okay.
Right? Yeah, one of the guys who they hadn't encountered. And initially, it was actually still, even though they were relatives, it was still actually a little bit of a tense encounter, apparently. But he was able to communicate to this guy effectively, and they said they were much more comfortable by virtue of the fact that they knew who he was, although they'd known him, he was a kid, right?
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so and he told them things like water coming out of taps and all sorts of things. And they thought this was a bit crazy, but they did eventually come in, and most of them settled, but one of them didn't settle and returned to the desert.
Okay.
And that was sometime in the mid-1980s, and that was the last anyone saw of him.
Mm.
So he could be out there on his own, or could have been out there on his own, or he may have died, because I think probably being in the desert on your own is probably pretty dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody knows what happened, but most of them settled. But yes, there was indeed an uncontacted group of Australian Aborigines into the 1980s.
Mm.
Yeah. They did say, though, that one of the father of this group had died some years earlier, and they think he might have had some idea about Western civilization, because they said he talked about things like planes and stuff, and the kids asked to be taken to see these things, and he always refused.
Oh, okay.
So he may have had some idea of what was out there, but anyway, so the rest of them had never had in contact, and were brought in, and that was 1984.
Yeah, we take a lot of take for granted a ton of the stuff we got in our modern society. It's kind of hard to imagine what it's like to actually be curious to see those things for the first time, you know?
Absolutely. And even in the pre-internet era, without the burst of technology we've had since then, the technology would have been nothing short of miraculous. I mean, as this gentleman said, even telling his relative about the water coming out of taps, and just water anytime you want it. It's there.
Yeah. Right.
As you say, we take it for granted.
Yeah, exactly, because we talk about internet right now, but back when I was a kid, it was a bit pre-internet, right? I don't think I had any real exposure to the internet till I was 11, perhaps. But back then it was like CD-ROMs and like other kind of things. I think what little internet there was is something I wasn't fully conscious about, I suppose.
Yes, and kids, of course, don't have a different level of interest. Although that's changed again, I guess now it's very accessible to smaller children. But certainly earlier.
Well, now we have mobile devices, so
that's right. Yeah, in the days of dial-up, it was a different situation.
Oh yeah,
that's probably what you. I guess that's what you would probably encounter when you're 11.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. So it requires a bit more knowledge.
Yeah.
Yes. So here we are. And I've got a few items I was going to raise. Actually, it'd be a cold, because we actually haven't talked about these before, Vernon, so you have no idea what I'm going to bring up.
Okay, well, yeah, let's see if I can just go off the top of my head here. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I know, exactly. So I think the plan was originally we were going to meet up, but it didn't happen. So my apologies. Yeah. But feel free to throw something at me too in return.
Okay, yeah, sure. We'll do just that. Yeah.
So I've actually previously. So also, too, I around about 24 hours ago now, I had an interview with Mr. Brass, who I think you've been interviewed by, Vernon.
Yeah. I know that guy. That little. I'm kidding.
Yeah. So Mr. I think it was a great interview. It went really well. It turned out Mr. Brass and I actually both have a number of interests in common. And I'm kind of surprised we never actually ran across each other before, to be honest. It's only after I became more active in Twitter over the last couple of months that I've come in contact with him.
It was a good conversation. I actually got around to listening to it yesterday. So
good. Oh, great. Yes. So basically, I had previously arranged a series of what I've called shocking facts. Now, it's probably not a great title, and I probably will try to come up with a better one. But I had them sitting there to discuss on Mr. Bryson, and it never actually happened. So we didn't get that. We had plenty of other things to talk about. So none of these got discussed. So these are items that I've put together where I think even MRAs and anti-feminists will be pretty shocked that this sort of thing is going on. So shall we dive in?
Yeah, sure. It's I know that you said that even MRAs were shocked about your opinion that women have a higher sex drive, or that women did in fact do work.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly. That's right.
This is more shocking than that.
This is more shocking than that. Okay, exactly. Right. That's right. So Just a quick pressy there. I talked a little bit about how women worked historically and so forth, and a few other items as well. Okay, here we go. Both men and women are less likely to provide CPR to a woman than a man. So when asked why, a number of reasons were given, but one that was given was fear of a false accusation.
Mm.
And that's my first shocking fact, that it's not just men, women too. Right. So there's other reasons as well. They're afraid they may injure a woman. That's another reason it's been given.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, so this is a woman as recipient of CPR.
Sorry, yeah. So both men and women giving CPR to a woman, or giving CPR, they're less likely to give CPR to a woman than a man. So this is an issue, of course, for survivability of serious, say, heart attack, something like that. So in the case of a woman, that you're going to find both men and women are more concerned about giving CPR to a woman.
Yeah, well, that's not surprising. I mean, I guess it would be shocking to some people, but we in the MRM is, if we hear it, we'll understand it.
Yes,
exactly.
That's right. Yeah. So it's probably something that's perhaps not shocking, but surprising maybe. And yes, unfortunately, I guess what surprised me a little bit was women answered that as well.
Right.
So I think from memory there may have been a slight difference where women were a little more likely to do it, to actually give CPR to a woman, but also to injuring a woman is another concern. Although, as I remember in my first aid training, I used to do quite a lot of first aid training, but that was way back. Mm-hmm. I do remember one of the things they said was, if you're giving someone CPR and you hear a rib crack, keep going. So the rib will heal later. The priority is giving them CPR.
Okay.
Yeah. This first one. So the second one, the World Food Programme doesn't feed men and boys following a disaster.
Straight up, don't.
And girls doesn't feed them. No, and we've got Haiti is the classic example. We know that I've got plenty of that's the best example I've got because I've got plenty of documentation. It's actually on Wiki for Men. Mm-hmm. They didn't let men and boys into the area in which food is provided, mm-hmm. and when asked why, they said that the men were likely to steal the food, which I think is not true actually. And men tend to be more inclined to actually give the food to others and provide it to their family and so forth. But anyway, they were also asked about what happens in the case of a family without any women and girls. And they said that special provision is made, and that, yes, they're very vague on that. And I have difficulty believing that in the period past, just after a disaster, that they've got time to make these special provisions for these families, for families with it. Particularly the case where, say, the women of the family may have been killed in the disaster. And gay rights groups have also raised this as a concern, legitimately, because they point out that same-sex couples are being discriminated against here.
Mm. That makes sense.
So and since then there's been other reports of that as well. By the way, they've openly admitted this is the case. We've heard other reports as well that this is still going on, and I've even seen claims by people who claim that they were working for the World Food Programme where they've definitely seen this on the ground, and they've definitely seen boys in a situation where they were not getting any food.
Mm.
Yeah. That's my second fact.
Right. Yeah. Well, what more can you say to this? I mean,
yeah.
Again, this is the sort of thing we believe is happening, but
yeah. When I first uncovered this about 8 or 9 years ago, it was quite a way back now, and I presented this to some other MRAs. They initially, there was disbelief, and they actually thought that maybe it was something that was being circulated incorrectly and so forth. They would present the data and show it's true.
Mm-hmm. And what better way than the source itself, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And the head of the World Food Programme has openly admitted this. In fact, she talked about it being kind of a feature, actually, of their system. Mm. Yeah. So I got screenshots of all of that because I think that once they figure out how that actually comes across, they may delete the sites, but we've got the screenshots.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it going to be in the Wiki for Men at all?
Yes, that's in Wiki for Men. Yeah, if you look on World Food Programme page in Wiki for Men, you will find it there, including the screenshots. So, Men and boys have higher mortality at every age. Every age. They're also more likely to be victims of violence too, and as infants and so forth. So violence against children is more likely to occur to infant boys than infant girls.
Right. The infants, we understand exactly what that means.
Yeah. And in fact, that's my fourth point. Abuse of infant boys is significantly more likely than abuse of infant girls.
Yeah.
This one actually, I think, is probably fairly well known. African Americans are more likely to be convicted than white Americans. The difference between men and women is 6 times greater.
Okay.
And that comes from Sonia Starr, who researched both topics. So she's a researcher at the University of Michigan.
Okay.
Boys are now more than a full year behind girls in reading. Now, that's a fairly general statement because there's a lot of different jurisdictions, but that's a fairly consistent result across the West.
Right.
Yes, I suppose some of these aren't as shocking to us. We're probably more familiar with it. Some of them aren't as well known. Women outnumber men at university 2 to 1, and the gap is widening.
Right, yeah. Now, regarding this, I suppose this need not be rectified necessarily in terms of getting more men into universities, because I don't think a lot of good will be done to them, especially in the environment we've got right now, right? Yeah. I mean, if they can go to trade schools instead, or just do anything else than this, I think they'd be on a better track, I think.
So, absolutely agree. In fact, this one comes with a bit of a caveat. I think precisely the reason you're mentioning. I feel there is a problem there, obviously, and it's a very misandric environment and so forth. But at the same time, I do have a suspicion that a lot of men are actively choosing not to go to university and probably making other choices like trade schools and so forth. So while I think there is a problem, it may not be as big as it initially appears on the surface. But nevertheless, it has been a growing divide. And yes, as you say too, once they get there, then it becomes a very misandric. It is a very misandric environment.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny, they teach patriarchy in those places, patriarchy theory, right? But it's more and more run by these women, of course. And the irony is not lost on me. It's the students, and they're kind of almost running this instead. And you know what I mean? But
well, we've seen. Oh, go on. Yeah.
No. I'm just saying that the more female dominant it is, the more patriarchy theory gets taught.
Absolutely, and then we've seen a fairly steady stream of people being almost run out of universities. In fact, there was, of course, Evergreen College, where a husband and wife team of lecturers. The name escapes me now, but I'm sure everyone knows what we're talking about there.
Brett Weinstein and Heather Hine.
Thank you. Yes. Now, just yesterday, I actually listened to another one that was fairly similar. It was this woman was doing a lecture, and she was arguing against BLM, and she basically had to be escorted into the building by police and out of the building by police, and it was very close to what we saw 10 years ago with Janice Fiamengo and Warren Farrell, where they also I don't think they were actually escorted in and out by police, but there were police there. So I think that was the first sign of what we're now seeing. But yeah, unfortunately, there's this growing intolerance across university campuses. So, as you said, sometimes the men may be better off not being there.
Probably.
Yeah. So, I mean, this one's probably, you know about this, of course, the high proportion of African American men that are spending their time in prison as well. This is actually one that we actually did talk about with I did talk about Mr. Bryce a little bit. We were talking about the essentially what amounts to the problem with the private prisons, and essentially what amounts to a prison industry that has developed in the US. And I think it's it's about 1 in 50 men that are actually in prison in the US, I believe, which is an absolutely extraordinary number.
Yeah.
And just completely dwarfs the number in any other country. And I do believe it has quite a lot to do with the private prison system. But I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, given that we're going in this cold?
I'm not just saying that it's what you call, because it's, I understand the problems with the private prisons and everything like that. I'm just saying if it's public, is it that much better? I think it's from my own perspective, I suppose.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So my concern is that they've effectively incentivized imprisoning people. So it's not the fact they're private per se, it's the fact that that has resulted in incentivization. So if you built a pay structure that didn't incentivize imprisonment, then I think it would work. Then you could privatize it. Then you could privatize them safely.
Right. It's a lot to think about, and I'm not saying I have like the full answers here yet. I just think that they have different incentives as it stands, the public and privates.
And that's been So if you could, I think you could build a pay structure which would solve this problem, but they haven't done it.
Right. Well, I'm not the guy with the solution here. Maybe I'll try and give it some thought. Not that I'm an expert.
Yeah, please do. And in all honesty, maybe this is something that should be suggested in American public policy, to building a different pay structure for these prisons, such that they no longer incentivize. Maybe something like basing it on recidivism rates or something. So if the men are not returning to prison, then the prisons get a higher pay rate or something along those lines. And it might be difficult to implement, but hopefully there will be ways of doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talk about prisons so often on this show. I think I should be a little bit better educated about it.
No, that's fair enough. I don't think I'd certainly call myself any expert. I've read a little bit about it, and I've read a bit about the history of imprisonment. One thing that people don't know, which is quite interesting, is the idea of imprisoning people as a punishment is actually relatively new. It only really comes from the 19th century. Prior to that, a prison is for when you put people so they couldn't run away while you were planning until you could punish them. So there'd be corporal punishment or capital punishment or what it happened to be. They would put them in cells so they couldn't run away. But the cells themselves weren't really regarded as part of the punishment. And it was 19th century UK that really came up with that idea, as they did so many others, good and bad.
Yep.
And still on the topic of prisons, feminists are pushing to eradicate women's prisons. Yeah, that's something that, again, is probably not as well known, but there have been a number of, in the UK in particular, there was a report generated by, it was led by a member of the House of Lords. I don't think it was actually a government report, but the report was led by a member of the House of Lords. And this report basically recommended closing all the women's prisons. And one of the advantages was you could rehouse them, provision them as men's prisons. More space to put men in prison. Isn't that great?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's just to us, what else is new, right? I mean,
yeah, that's right. It's. I think perhaps I should have even phrased that these things will be shocking, I guess, to probably the wider community rather than experienced MRAs. But people coming, certainly, I've seen people coming into the movement who aren't used to these things. But you're right, actually.
I think this will be better phrased as how many is this so far? Like 6?
Well, I've got 9 actually.
Okay, 9 things every new MRA should know, or
that's better. I like that.
Yeah,
that's good. Yeah, and that's good. I might even do an article on those lines. I've actually got a few more. Actually, well, I'm on my way to originally started as a list of 10, and I'm on my way to my second list of 10. So
okay, well, we can get rid of the number and just say things every MRA should know.
Should know, yeah. Actually, the honey badgers did actually a video along similar lines recently, which is really good, actually.
Yeah. I saw that one. It's a very good one.
Yeah. Yes, highly recommended. We put it up on A Voice for Men.
Sure.
So many countries, including Australia and the United States, deny men the ability to leave the country if they are defaulting on child support payments. Even though women default at higher rates than men, there are few cases of women having been denied the ability to leave their country. Now, I couldn't remember any cases recently, and I thought that there weren't any. And I looked in my own notes, and I found one that I'd found. And that's actually on Wiki for Men. I found one case where they used this rule against a woman. I think it was in the US. But it is, I think it would be fair to say, it is rarely used against women and quite often used against men. So, so women defaulted on child support at higher rates than men, but rarely are sanctioned for it.
I see.
and in fact, it's probably related to it because they know there are no sanctions, or sanctions are unlikely. They end up perhaps having higher default rates. U.S. prisons, I should say, men for non-payment. Yep. So, next item. Israel goes a step further. I think we have talked about. I know we've talked about this, Vernon. So, in some cases, Israel will assess future child support payments and require them to pay all of the amount before they're allowed to leave the country. And if they can't pay it, they're stuck in Israel, and they don't have they do this to foreign men. They don't give them a right to work. So it's and then apparently don't see the problem with denying men the ability to return to their home to work, and keeping them stuck in a foreign country without any lawful right to work. How are they ever going to pay off that money?
Yeah, that's imprisonment.
Yep, it is, exactly. They think there are hundreds of foreign men in Israel in this situation. And I've previously talked about Noam Hupert. Now, I've been unfortunately very busy and I haven't reached out to Noam, but I will commit to doing so in the next week. Yep. And I'm hoping that we can see if we can arrange some time to have him on the show.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, he's currently still stuck in Israel. I spoke to him about 6 weeks ago, and he was still stuck in Israel. And he famously, because it's been in the mainstream media, he famously is stuck for 8,000 years. Because that's how much time they've assessed it's going to take him to pay the money. Next one.
That's cult level crazy.
Yes, it is, isn't it? It's just, It seems like, I suppose, part of it's bureaucracy, but even the fact that the computer would come up with a number like that and they don't have anything in there that says cap at 100 years in the code. Part of it's bureaucracy, and Israel is notorious for being a bureaucratic country. But at the same time, they have to realize that if they're going to deny foreign men the ability to leave, and any work they do is going to be illegal, and it's going to be low paid, and they're just never going to have a chance to pay off this money. And if they've got nobody outside the country that can loan them the money or something else, they're stuck. They just can't get in.
I see.
It's crazy. Female teachers mark down boys. This has been shown to be true in over 60 countries.
Would you say it's mostly Western?
So 60 countries. I think it extends outside the West now. And when they first discovered this, they started researching it, and they looked in different countries, and they found it all over the place. I think they found it in the Middle East and elsewhere. So part of it relates to disruption, they think, where boys are more likely to be disruptive students, and they mark down disruptive students. So what that means is that the boys are getting, for the same work, the boys will get lower results. And this has been consistently shown. And one of the ways they found this, in particular in the US with the SATs, is when students do computer marking, and there's no bias there in terms of there's no knowledge even as to who they are. They're just a number in the system. This difference goes away. But when they're marked by female teachers, they see this bias in the marking, and the boys' scores go down.
Right. Yeah.
Crazy. One crazy world we live in. And next one is many countries deny men paternity testing without a court order. So it's not the only case, but the most common country that's cited for this is France. And as I understand it, French government officials have explicitly said this is intended to keep the family together. In other words, this is state-sponsored false paternity. The state acknowledges false paternity will exist and wants the men to not know, so that they will stay in the family.
Right. Crazy.
Now, so go on.
Crazy. Yeah. What else do you want to say to this? It's like
exactly. Yeah. That was kind of the point of this list, to show, because even people get involved and they see things are bad, but some of these, and I've got documentation that supports all of this. I've collected these over a number of years. Yeah, it comes across as absolutely insane. So Spanish and Swiss genetic labs report a large number of French men as customers. So the men are doing it. French men are doing it illegally by going to foreign labs but then they can't present the information in court because it wasn't officially asked for. So they may know, they can't present it in court. Now, that is also true for other countries too, but France is usually the one where it's particularly mentioned. Next one. So the basically this is more to do with Australia, but the gender earnings gap and the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, and that has to do with some stuff I did a few years ago. We have an organisation in Australia. It's actually a government department called the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, and its job is to monitor and try to reduce the workplace gender pay gap. We, of course, know this is completely bogus. There is no pay gap. There is an earnings gap. Men definitely do earn more, but the reasons for that are well understood. And I got the Workplace Gender Equality Agency to admit that this was not systemic discrimination. And I published it, and even from our side, there was very little interest, unfortunately. So also too, it's worth noting that somebody found a photo of the Workplace Gender Equality Agency staff. They'd taken a photo of all the staff and put them online. And there were about 33 or 34 staff. And there were 3 or 4 men. So we thought was really interesting. So there were definitely 3 men, and there was a 4th person in the picture who you're not sure if they're male or female. So it's 3 or 4 men out of 34. That's the Workplace Gender Equality Agency.
I see.
Yes. That's the end of my list.
Yeah, I think in their mind, the more equal it is, the less men in it. So.
What was that? Sorry, the more equal.
The more equal it is, the less men there are in it. Is their mindset?
Oh, right. Yes, I see what you mean. Yes. Which actually reminds me of the research they did in Sweden when they found that the more equal society was, or it's not just in Sweden, but they found particular results in Sweden. The more equal a society was, the more differentiation they found with roles. Essentially, the people were choosing. So more Swedish women were doing what could be described as more traditional gender roles.
Right, yeah. A little bit of a different context, but it's interesting to kind of mention.
Yeah, just reminded me when you said that. That's right. The context is quite different. And of course, I must put a caveat in that what we talk about as a traditional gender role isn't actually that traditional because women worked historically.
Exactly, right.
Yeah. So it was actually something, and that's where the title of my book comes from, the Victorian fallacy, was this idea that people think of the Victorian era, think of history like the Victorian era. That's the Victorian fallacy.
Yeah. So you should probably openly challenge that terminology then. So it's not traditional, really, since women worked, as you said. Exactly. So what do we replace it with? Gynocentric roles? Or is it because...
Yeah, there isn't any good terminology as far as I know. This is something that's only really sort of people starting to get the idea now. Mr. Brass mentioned about women working, which I was really happy that he actually brought that up. And I've seen a few people mention it in the last few years. It's something that is relatively new that's getting out there into the community. There isn't really a good terminology, and perhaps it is time for us to start using some sort of different terminology, not referring to them as traditional gender roles. They're pretty much 19th century gender roles, actually, or not even in some cases, because there were plenty of women working in the 19th century, as I mentioned in the recording last night.
Right. Yeah. So you can probably call this phenomenon, this pseudo traditionalism, as something else that's cropped up alongside feminism, I suppose.
Absolutely.
Right.
So my take on it is that really women started to leave the workforce in the mid 19th century. That's really when it started to happen, and that continued into the 20th century. And a lot of women had left the workforce, but then World War I and World War II came along. Women worked temporarily, certainly in World War I, and then World War II came along, and a lot of women worked again. And then after World War II is when you start seeing women saying they want to go they want to work, they want to be in the workforce, but it's actually effectively they're saying we want to return to the workforce. So as a group, exactly. And so, but of course there were women who never left the workforce. Poor women never really left. They've always had two income households. So you look at the poorest sector of society, and aristocratic women never really worked. It was really the middle class that left the workforce and then returned.
Well, maybe that's a good term, aristocratic.
That's not bad because it mimics the aristocratic roles. It's right. A
Right.
housewife was really a something that you would only have seen among
Right.
the
Yeah.
aristocrats prior to that. And in actual fact, of course, aristocratic women, we see this even in the Bible. It's mentioned actually, and in a few other sources right through history. The wife, or a wealthy woman who was a wife, would often be managing a household. So she wasn't doing any cleaning.
Mhm.
She was managing the staff who were doing the cleaning.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm kind of reminded that the whole, no, I'm the brains of this whole thing.
Yeah, and in all honesty, some of these households were almost like businesses in themselves,
Yeah.
because they had budgets, so they had they had food coming in and various things that were coming in, and the wives were running that sort of thing. And in actual fact, historically, and I talk about this stuff in the book, there were quite a number of cases where the lord of the manor would leave to go on crusade or whatever it happened to be, and his wife would be the one who would run the castle or even run the estate while he was away. That was sort of thing was quite common. And there you see women being involved in politics, which I mentioned last night too.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The point I was making was that, we're seeing so many of these, conservatives and neo-trads and everything like that. They're just kind of saying, well, women need to go back into our traditional roles, but as it turns out, they just want to go into an aristocratic role.
That's right. That's a really good way of putting it, because that was the only women who were doing that until 150 years ago were aristocrats.
Right. Yeah.
I love that.
Because this is what really bugs me about them. They're if they're just they can't admit that they want female aristocracy, right? Kind of like a prettier way of saying female supremacy, but it's like, so I think we should be more actively calling these women out and idiot men that think this is a good idea.
Yes, exactly. That's right. Which will put men quite literally back in the firing line if those gender roles were to be reinstituted.
Exactly. Yeah.
Where the women are at home being aristocrats, and what are the men doing? Off getting shot at, and weapons are becoming much more dangerous.
Right. Yeah. One thing I saw on, for example, Lauren Chen's Twitter once was, she was looking through this phenomenon of women just staying home and, in her words, spending her man's money but making food and whatever. And she says, "What's wrong with this?" I'm paraphrasing here.
I think we can see a few things wrong with it.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yes, but that's right.
Just parasitism. It's not being like a proper helpmate, as I think some refer to it. It's not a real partnership of individuals.
That's right.
It's just that's what I can't put it any nicer. It's parasitism.
And doing a bit of housework is really not that big of a deal. And we see, of course, a lot more men doing housework now, and more men living alone and doing. We see that in MGTOW. I've seen many MGTOW say that. They say, yeah, sure, I do about half an hour or whatever, and then I'm done. It's all, so,
right.
it isn't a big deal. A lot of, and in general, and that's of course why the daytime soap operas were almost a cliche actually in the 1950s onwards.
Of course,
where you had the women sort of sitting and watching all the soap operas. Well, obviously they had plenty of disposable time.
Well, they had a lot of disposable time, and this is funny. This is kind of reminding me of so now we're going into a different kind of genre, like than soap operas. But so recently I watched the entire season of something called Jetman, right? It's a Japanese Super Sentai Tokusatsu series, like one in like a huge list of it, right? And that was especially popular / controversial due to the fact that they were doing this love triangle thing, and they really upped the drama in that one. And this is a kids show, right? So right, yeah. So they had a love triangle with the Red Ranger and the White Ranger and the Black Ranger. And the Black Ranger was the more what some call womanizing. I don't like that term, but kind of like really rough and kind of like handled women kind of on the rough side, right? He's kind of this dangerous bad boy type. And the mothers, they watched it. since the kids were watching it, they were watching the show. They had all this free time watching the show, and they were like these big fangirls of the Black Ranger of all, right? And they
All the
were,
mums.
yeah, the moms, like, were begging. So the Black Ranger in the final the epilogue of the final episode dies, right? And this is the so, and they were just begging, don't kill him off, like the begging the people in the show, please don't kill him. We love him so much, but the point I was making was that in the women, the mothers, have this free time to kind of watch, because this is before DVDs, right? It was aired on TV, but
Okay.
yeah, but they've got
Yeah,
this free time and
that's a good
to
point.
gawk at this bad boy.
Yes, and the poor old husband. I mean, I've heard stories about the men in Japan having apartments in the city, and spending the week in the city, and having small capsule apartments, and then only getting home on the weekend. Awful stuff like that.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Basically, working out of their own districts and out of their own cities is like way far from it. Is a fairly common enough phenomenon. I think the term is tanshinfunin. Basically, it's just working like somewhere way off. So.
Right. In fact, the fact that there's a term in Japanese probably goes some way to showing how common it is too. That's right. So these are men who are having to commute a substantial distance, and it's too far to go back regularly. And yeah, that's awful. And I know there are other countries where this sort of thing occurs too, but it almost seems like Japan has made it sort of almost an art form, where you've got these men who are spending their days away from home. And as I said, actually, I mentioned this in the Mr. Bryce interview about. They say, men can have it all. I don't think men can have it all. I think there's quite a price to be paid in terms of working full time and supporting a family. And men miss out on a lot of firsts, even though they would for their kids, and they would like to be there for more of these things, and they can't be in a lot of cases.
Right. Yeah. So even in this quasi-aristocratic, gynocentric setting, even in a non-feminist context, women still have closer to all than the man does.
I think so, and certainly a lot more flexibility in time. And this is pretty easy to determine. I have driven past, say, local parks at say 10 in the morning, and it's really interesting to do a random sample just to count the people and look at who's in the park. It'll be about 90% female, because women tend to have more flexibility in their time than men. More men are in full-time work, and they're at the office at that time.
Exactly.
Right. And this is something we see all around the world. So there's a Japanese term, actually, that and my pronunciation may be terrible, but I think it's a word that's been imported from English, which helps. But the word is salaryman. At least that's how I would say it in English, right?
Yes. Yeah, they call it salaryman, but it's really salaryman.
Salaryman. So, and if I understand correctly, that's essentially a man that works full time. In I don't know. Do you want to expand a little bit more on that, or what it means?
It's basically a man that basically works full time in a suit in a company. And here's the thing about this thing. It's more of a the expectations are strict as such that if you have to work late, you're not you're considered a loser or a worthless person if you complain, if you have extra work to do, which may be heaped on you at all times, and if you don't do other obligatory sort of things, like if you're higher rank. Sorry, that's not exactly what I mean. What I mean is, if you're of a higher status, like you're like the senpai of a few what we call subordinates, I suppose. You're obligated to treat them to things like taking them out to eat and treating them to drinks, that kind of thing. Sometimes salarymen are actually practically forced to drink if the company hosts it. So even if they may not actually want to have any drinks, they have to at least save face. Right. So lots of things that men are expected over there. So
So it's unhealthy, especially if there may be a variety of reasons why a person doesn't want to drink, so they're forced into it.
And the wives still complain that they're not home in time, and setting a good example for the kids, whatever. So
and I'm thinking too, yeah, that's right. Those men are out. They may well want to be home and spending more time with their kids and their wife, and they can't
Right.
because they're effectively forced into doing this by their work.
Mhm.
So that's, yeah, quite unhealthy physically and probably psychologically as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
No,
I mean,
thank you.
people extol Japan all the time for this or that, but it's not an enviable system. The education
No,
system is not enviable. The work system is not enviable. It's I would not
that's
recommend we go into that kind of direction ever.
that's interesting actually, because even though I was aware of problems with the work system and so forth, I actually thought the education system was very good.
I don't think so. It's basically just memorization, rote memorization, and
Right.
because we have things called juku, which mean basically is like schooling and training outside of school. So it's really uh take kind of sucks the childhood out of you, really, just
Right.
so you can pass some tests, and
Yeah.
you could be this top student in school and because of all this, but when reality crashes in, that you could fail a test or this has been for nothing, any of those reasons, you will turn into a hikomori. You'll become this person that is completely walled off from society, and just
Oh, is
traps himself in his room.
like shamed, or is that you mean,
No,
or
just retreats basically.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Yes, actually, I've heard a little bit about that. And there is a phenomenon of people who are retreating to their bedrooms, aren't they? And I think it's mostly male, but not exclusively male. Is that right?
Not exclusively male. Yes, it is
Yeah,
mostly male, but
yeah,
because the expectations are bigger for them, and of course
yeah.
they would react this way and everything like that. So they would have to, so sometimes gets pretty bad that they would actually take over entire houses to themselves by force. Sometimes there's
Oh,
been
okay.
some instances of that. Other times it's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
them shutting themselves in completely in their room. But
Right,
right,
right. So
yeah,
it is interesting you mentioned about sort of the kids doing the hard work and so forth when they're young, like you said, sucking up their childhood. That's quite consistent with something I've seen in Australia. In that Australia's on the edge of Asia, right?
mhm, yes,
And Australia's largest trading partners are in Asia,
mm,
and there's a lot of movement of people backwards and forwards. A lot of Australians will go to and spend time in Asia and work in Hong Kong and wherever else. And we have a fairly substantial number of people who come here as well. A lot of people came from Hong Kong in the years leading up to the transfer back to China, for example, but also Japan and
yeah,
the kids, the Asian kids, tend to do very well in our school
yeah.
system here. They're often at the top, particularly
Yep.
in the physical
Yeah, sure. They
sciences
do
and
they do
maths.
well. It's just
Yeah,
what's behind that.
exactly. And
Yeah, right.
this is right. This is kind of my argument. My argument has been that what you don't see is the kids busting a gut, and
Mhm.
I'm not sure that in my view, it's not such a healthy way of living. Yes, you do well in your exams, that's great, and you're at the top of the class, fantastic. But what was the price?
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
I mean, around before high school, I used to do like incredibly well in school, but I think it started to drop off once I discovered Master of Puppets by Metallica.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess I kind of wanted to be a musician since, and
Nice.
I actually am. Most of you know that, but
Yeah.
and but I'm also a software developer, so
Yeah.
it
You're
ultimately worked out in the end. It's just less of my sanity kind of erased. You know.
yeah. It's good to have
Mhm.
something you're passionate about outside work too. I think is an important
Yeah.
point, I guess, to draw out of that as well. I imagine in your case, it's your music.
Yes. Exactly.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that's very good. Yes, which comes back to the point previously about probably the kids in Asia working too hard, the poor things.
Mhm.
So yes, I think that, and I can understand why they're doing it. In some cases, I was going to say some of the countries aren't as rich, and say a place like Vietnam, for example, have been poorer for a long time, and I can see why they would want to focus on education. But then you've got countries like Japan, which are among the wealthiest countries in the world, and they're still doing it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And since you brought up poorer Asian countries, I'm thinking immediately of India, because it is such there that they're really pushing the whole programmer
Yes.
aspect career, but
Yes.
they're also really pushing, from my understanding, some more because they're a lot of them run scams, right? A lot of companies running kind of scam operations and like
well, a lot of scams definitely run out of India.
But it's my understanding that this sort of thing is kind of praised as a bit of a hustle, kind of like you have like a increased reputation for actually being a scammer because you're trying, because in their mind, because the in the minds of these sort of people, you're taking it from those who don't deserve it, kind of like a pseudo Robin Hood kind of a thing.
Yes, I see. Yes, yeah. So they're not feeling too badly about what they do because it's okay because they ripped off some rich Westerners. Yeah,
exactly. That's precisely the yeah.
Yeah. Now I must clarify something on terminology. Actually,
sure.
In Australian vernacular, if we say Asian, so excuse me, because that's if we say Asian, it means East Asian. Which is interesting because I found out in the UK, if they say Asian without a further qualification, it means South Asian.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
So I probably should get used to saying East Asian on conversations.
It's fine, but see, this is terms neither of those I've really used that much, so it's kind of hard for me to kind of tell which one's which.
And fair enough. And Asia being such a large place and having 60% of the human population in it, you've got everything from Japan, to Israel and Russia, all in Asia. So yes, it is. Yes.
Yeah.
Quite a substantial continent. So
that's
right. Yeah. But anyway, so yes, in East Asia, that's where I found the kids. As of course, we're focusing very much on the education, and losing their childhood to a certain extent. So I thought the way you put that was really interesting. Actually, sucking up their childhood.
Right. Well, I'm actually wondering why a lot of media in Japan is so vibrant over there. It's because they're really appealing to that lost childhood. Because
that's interesting,
right? Yeah, because Japan's got the best toys, the best shows. Bit of an editorial here, I really do think that.
No, great, that's great.
But so there's a lot of appeal to that side. Like the less there is, the more things try to attract it, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. That's really interesting, actually. So we're planning a trip to Japan in a couple of years, actually, and we do have some things on the list that perhaps I won't go too specific because, as you know, I don't talk about my family too much. But
of course.
We do have some things on the list that are along those lines, and they're things that purely come out of Japan. So I actually saw a Japanese music video the other day. You may know it because it's very, very well known. It's called Pon Pon Pon. Do you know the one I mean?
I don't think so. No, I haven't followed it for a while.
That's all right. So it's an 18-year-old. I looked up. She was 18 at the time the video was done. Young girl, and it's not a bad song actually. Probably not really what I listen to regularly, but it's not a bad song. But the music video, very strange. I shall certainly send it to you after this. You may well. That's what it's called. Maybe my pronunciation is terrible, but I can pronounce it. Pon.
Yeah. It's as good as it can get,
Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. Anyway, I'll send it to you afterwards. It was apparently very popular. It was 2011, I think, or something, and it was quite popular at the time in Japan. So anyway, I'll send it to you afterwards. But very strange music video. I've watched a few Japanese game shows.
Oh yeah,
they're absolutely fascinating. And the number of guys on these game shows, maybe it's just me, but I've only watched a handful of them. But I swear, out of the 5 I watched, 3 of them had guys dressed up as samurai.
Well, if you're because Shimura Kan, the late comedian, hosted his show that's kind of had everybody in like a feudal era outfit. So that very well could be the case. I don't know if you watch something more modern, in which that probably wouldn't have been the case. But
they were probably a bit older, actually.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, but basically, it's they just like to do wacky kind of things. They're huge on slapstick. One favorite one is they would create some kind of concoction and have the challengers drink it, guess what it is, that kind of thing. And
I think I may have seen some of that. And another one was something about sticking your hand in a box, and there was also one of them the bugs and
right. Yeah. So
yes.
Yeah. So
Anybody who I was going to say anybody who hasn't seen a Japanese game show should watch at least one.
exactly. Yep. Right.
With
Yeah.
or without subtitles. I think you probably get the idea
Well,
even without
one
subtitles.
one one game show that immediately comes to mind that I think most Americans know. So I don't know if the Australians know it either, but do you know something called Extreme Elimination Challenge?
Actually, that doesn't ring a bell. Go on.
Okay, so um, I think a lot of Americans know what I'm talking about. So I don't know if you know who Kitano is. He's also known as Beat Takeshi, but he's a comedian who has experience in like Yakuza films, like gangster films. But he's also a comedian. And he and a co-host basically are, well, they're hosts, but the show is about these huge athletic activities, just these crazy kind of I can't even describe it in words. You just have to kind of see it. The original show was called Takeshi's Castle, but in the Western world, it's been Extreme Elimination Challenge, and it's dubbed over with some silly English lines, which I don't really care for that much, but still, it's very entertaining. Yeah, you should probably see it.
I may have seen. I don't know if I knew the name, but I may have seen something like that once. I do remember one episode where these people were doing some sort of extreme physical challenges, and there was some castle involved. So
Yeah,
that may have been
that's
that actually.
probably it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right. I didn't recognize the name, but I think I did actually see it. I said I've only probably seen about half a dozen, five or six or something. But yeah, there was one about something about a platform that kept tilting, and these people on this platform they were trying to hold on, and yeah.
Right. Well, everybody was just having like ridiculous fun,
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Yeah, exactly. You fall into jelly or something silly like that if you fall off,
right.
there. So, yes. Yes, everybody should see at least one. Yeah.
Well, it's too bad that we don't have like more local MRAs and stuff like that, because we should do game shows like this just to.
Interesting. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Might give us some thoughts for the future. Maybe in an ICMI, we could some extreme challenges or something.
Yeah, that'd be only too fun.
Oh, that sounds like a good idea. We can have to put that one away for one of the conferences. I think. That might have legs actually. Ooh, there we go.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know. Do you have anything else? I've probably out of material.
Yeah. Well, I'm just about out of energy, so I think that's it's probably a good place to stop it. So.
No worries at all. Yeah, I've done 2 recordings in 2 days, which is a lot for me. Yeah. I know some people do it at that rate a lot, but I don't. So I usually do it once every couple of weeks.
Sounds good.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you very much. I think that was an interesting episode. We covered some interesting material, and I think we got a really interesting idea there. I think that might have legs. Some sort of challenge at a conference. I'm going to mention that to Mike Buchanan.
Yeah, that sounds good. All right.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Sure. All right. 2 weeks.
Bye-bye. 2 weeks.
Yeah. All right.
Bye.
Bye.